Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rowan Hetherington. I'm Program Manager for the Digital Community of Practice. I sit in Ethan McCarty's team. And today I'm going to talk a little about listening. Obviously, listening at a high level is critical to our business goals. If we want to create higher relevance and higher value to provide to our constituents, we need to really understand what is going to be relevant and what is going to be of value to them. And it's hard for us to sit in a little dark room and come up with that ourselves. So it's really important to think about how we can find that kind of information out from our constituents, from our target audiences. So today I'm going to talk about the specific definition that we're going to cover in this session, the opportunity of listening, some questions to consider, and some examples, and then the exercise for you all. So what is listening? I just outlined a very high-level description of why it's important. In this session, I'm going to talk specifically about listening in the context of social research. So there are many forms and many different objectives that you may want to pursue using listening. This covers 5 of them, or 5 main categories. The first one is monitoring. So monitoring can be really useful if you have a brand crisis or if you just want to measure and benchmark your progress over time. So just a couple of examples would be, for example, monitoring the IBM brand in a country or in a language, seeing the number of mentions of the brand, how positive or negative they are, and really understanding what is being said about your brand in relation to your competitors, in relation to products, etc. But also it can be incredibly useful and valuable in a crisis. So if something does go wrong, it's really important to understand what is being said because, as I'm sure you're well aware, information travels very fast online nowadays. And so if you're listening and you're aware of what's happening, then you're in a much, much better place and position to respond effectively. Mining is a very interesting area, and I'll share some results with you in a couple of slides. Basically, this is talking about mining social for leads. And really enabling our IBM sellers to find prospects and clients within the social web. So whereas we used to think about, the list that we might have in our desk drawer, as Ben mentioned earlier, there's actually now a whole universe of people out there who are visible to us if we only look for them. And I'll show you a great example of some results from that. Also, we can use listening to identify influencers. The expertise locator within IBM will help us identify our own influencers and subject matter experts. But if we're looking for influencers on a specific topic or within a specific constituency or industry, it's really useful to be able to find out where those people are outside of IBM. Insights. As I mentioned before, it's critical we understand our constituents in order to be able to provide them with the right content, with the right messaging, with the right value at the right time, in the right place. We need to understand what their interests are, what their beliefs are, what their ambitions are, and where they are in the digital space. Do they blog? Do they use Twitter? Many different parts of the world, people use different types of tools, and also different audiences use different types of tools, so that's very important. And lastly, to measure. So social research or social listening is a very effective tool to be able to measure the effectiveness of things like product launches, things like campaigns, and also just your brand, the sentiment around your brand over time. Is that improving? Are things affecting it? So that's a really useful measure to include in your ongoing performance metrics. So I'll cover a couple of examples very fast. The first is the one I mentioned around mining. This is an example from North America. It's a pilot that started in 2009, continued in 2010. The objective was to drive sales by mining social media for sales leads. And the results were pretty impressive. So in 2010, they actually generated 6.5 million in OI and had over 1,000 discussions. So obviously that's proving the pilot out, and it is rolling out now in more countries. Another example is identifying influencers external to IBM. The STG team at corporate wanted to understand where the influencers were for STG outside of the US. And they discovered that they were dotted around the world, but in fact most of those people were situated in Europe. And in fact there's one in Italy. So this is a guy who's quite influential. He's an independent industry analyst based in Rome. And of course, why is this information useful to us? I think this really ties in with the IBM digital strategy. And can anyone remember point 1 of the IBM digital strategy? I have a few nods, but no one...
Connect experts and expertise.
There we go. Thank you very much. So it's all about connecting experts and expertise to make the world work better. And how can you connect experts and expertise if you don't know who the experts are? So it's really important to understand how to use these tools. So what is listening for IBM? I'm not going to go through this in detail, but it's important to understand that it is really important. It's important to how we deliver the brand differentiators. Listening allows us to understand how to set a shared agenda in the context of existing communications and conversations out there. It allows us to identify those key experts. It allows us to gather key insight, as I mentioned previously, and it's really key to the demand system work. Without listening, how are we going to be able to provide relevance and value in order to drive that increase in yield? And as I mentioned previously, it's a great form of measurement. So it's really integral to what we're trying to do within IBM. So based on this importance, IBM has established a social intelligence center of competency. And this is being used to build and use IBM solutions. So this is a initiative that has been established in partnership with the CIO's office, with MI, and with the brands. I guess the best contact point for this work would be the digital community of practice. So if you have questions about this, please get online and join the digital community of practice if you haven't already, and discuss with some of the experts in there. It is a good place to go to find out what has already been happening in terms of listening and whether you can leverage existing work rather than going off and doing something that may overlap. Something that someone else in another country is doing. Which leads into the next point, that there's no single listening solution. So coordination is really, really important. There may be someone who speaks in another country that speaks the same language, that is looking for exactly the same keywords. There may be people in different brands or areas within your own country who are performing similar listening work. So it's really important to coordinate with your local digital leader and also with this Centre of Excellence. Now, in terms of tools, this is a really broad and fast-moving area. There are a whole load of different free listening tools, some of which we covered in the earlier segments. There are also paid solutions. So Conversion is the kind of vendor that is most used at the moment by IBM. We also have Cognos Consumer Insights, or CCI, which is IBM owned, and Banter, which is IBM owned. And some real-time monitoring tools which allow you to monitor kind of literally 24/7 real-time. I think the key here and the most important thing to take away is to practice some form of listening. You know, it doesn't matter if it's 10 minutes desk research in the morning on your own using a free tool. That will start to give you some awareness of what is going on out there. And if it if you feel that it becomes necessary to perform some paid, some funded listening, then the research you will have done yourself is likely to inform the brief. So the opportunity, there are lots of different figures out there from lots of different organizations, but the key point here is that social networks are being used by most of our constituents. Most of our target audiences are using social, and in fact they trust, to Ben's point earlier, they trust information from their friends, people like you or people like themselves, experts, people online, over some of the more traditional communications. So finally, some questions to ask yourselves. If you're thinking about doing some listening, first of all, think about what's your objective. Again, as Ben mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily always a question that we ask ourselves, but it's really very important if we're going to invest time in doing something like this. So what is the objective? How will you actually use the findings? What are you hoping to achieve by doing this? What constituency are you addressing? You all defined a constituency earlier. It's really important to be clear about this because in the online space, constituencies are really king. It's all about tapping into groups of people who share interests, who have shared beliefs, who have shared pain points, and potentially shared ambitions. So it's defining, who is that group? Is there a LinkedIn group that fits that definition? Where do they exist online? And really starting to understand where these people are and what their concerns are. So getting really into the heads of those constituents. Does any previous listening exist? We covered that before, but it's really important to remember to cover that step off. Otherwise, we may have countries all over the world doing exactly the same work and not knowing about it. So again, I'd encourage you to ensure that your digital leader is really across all of the work that you're doing in this area so that they can ensure that there's not duplication locally. And within the digital community of practice, you can certainly let everyone know what you're doing so that they can leverage your work and you can leverage theirs. Is there an existing list of keywords? That again is very important and something else that's worth sharing. Who are the influencers and experts? We've covered that off. Where are these people talking? I think we've covered that. What information is available on the topics that you're seeking to learn about? What's already out there? If there is a lot of information in one place, maybe you could set up a feed so that would just come into your inbox on a regular basis and you can keep up to date with the latest conversation. Which leads into the next point, which tools or technology platform will you use? You can use simple things like Google Alerts or Twitter search. There's a whole host of free tools out there, and again, that list is on the digital community of practice. And I guess lastly, is this an ongoing program? Or is this a short-term effort? If you're monitoring a crisis, it might be a short-term effort. If you're monitoring the brand, it's probably a long-term, ongoing program. And how frequently will you listen is wrapped into that. So is this a one-off moment in time? Is this yearly, quarterly, monthly, or real time? Which gets almost to the point of having a dashboard where you're kind of just watching what's going on in real time. We're certainly not there yet on the most part, but I think this is a really important area for us to focus on. And so I really encourage you to, as you did today in the exercise, start to set up some feeds, do a little bit of listening just to start to understand what is out there and start to understand your audience.